Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching News 9 Live. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has stressed the importance of preventing an overshoot of 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming in order to avoid multiple and concurrent hazards. We are walking when we should be sprinting. These are the words that are coming from the IPCC chair, Ho Sung Lee, at the launch of the synthesis report of the 6th assessment of its report. It is the 4th in chronology and the final one. Now, at the current pace, the report states that the world is likely to breach the target of restricting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2040. The panel also warned that failing to meet this goal could lead to irreversible impacts and risks for human and natural systems, and that the longer and higher the overshoot, the worse the consequences will be. According to the IPCC's synthesis report, global warming will have a catastrophic impact on global food security as well. And that's not all, because heat waves have already hurt agricultural output in India, along with causing several other adverse fallouts as well. News 9 Plus's special docu-series called The Big Bun takes a look at exactly that, exactly how the heat wave and the ever-changing and adverse impacts of climate change are taking place in our country and the globe as well. Here's a snippet. Take a look. We'll continue the discussion further.
Human beings in the 21st century are demonstrating terrifying adaptability to unprecedented climate change. The soaring temperatures that come with climate change are becoming the new normal. The boiling frog analogy explains this phenomenon. A frog put in a pot of boiling water jumps out quickly. But if it's put in a pot of water and the heat is increased gradually, the frog will slowly cook to death. So, are you behaving like a frog in a simmering climate change pot? An intense heat wave that swept across large parts of India has broken records of past 122 years, putting a large chunk of people at the risk of heat-related health impacts.
What the extreme heat conditions and heat wave do is, of course, the direct effect on the skin and the rest of the organs. But the indirect water electrolyte mediated effects are most crucial. Physical and mental health actually gets affected seriously by the depletion of water and the electrolytes.
Now, coming to physical health, we realize that heat wave can actually lead to increased risk for cerebrovascular accidents. It can impact your lungs, it can impact your heart, especially people who have pre-existing comorbidities like they have a pulmonary disorder or those who have heart disease. They can really be impacted by the heat exhaustion that may lead to heat strokes.
It's not anything new that has happened this time. It has been happening for last 2 to 3 decades at least, since there has been a rising temperature. Every year the record is broken.
Rising temperature across India has affected wheat production of the country. Punjab is one of the leading wheat-producing states in the country. Farmers in this state have suffered huge crop losses due to the extreme heat. Currently, the world is about 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the 19th century, which indicates that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen by 50%. Experts claim that there is a 50-50 chance of the average global temperature rising to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 5 years. And the chances of that happening are constantly increasing with time. A study conducted by 29 researchers and climate scientists warns that with rising temperature of the globe, heat waves will be more common and hotter in coming times. As per the report, heat waves are likely to happen 30 times more in the Indian subcontinent. And if the situation is left unchecked, then we may soon witness worsening droughts, rising sea levels, and mass extinction of species.
Well, the list of concerns is certainly never ending. You can catch that documentary on our News 9 Plus application, download it from the Play Store or the Apple App Store as well for other cutting edge documentaries as well. But coming back and cycling back to the climate challenge at hand, joining me in the studio is my colleague Nivedita Khandekar, Senior Associate Editor at News 9 Plus, and also Aarti Khosla, Founder, Climate Trends, and Anjal Prakash, who's a Research Director and Adjunct Associate Professor at the Bharati Institute of Public Policy. A very warm welcome on the broadcast. Nivedita, first to you. You know, the Big Bun, some really, gritty and moving visuals in that documentary as well. And that frog example that has been spoken about. If at all we are that particular frog in that boiling hot pot, are our policy makers, people who can actually make a change in our climate change action, are they with us in that pot?
They are with us, but half-heartedly, because the policymakers are not actually putting environment first in the environment versus development debate. And the development of infrastructure takes priority, because of which there is massive damage to environment. So all this which can be done through policies addressing not just issues at hand in India, but because we are the sufferers of problems that have been created because of the historical emissions. So all this can be addressed, but we are very slow in addressing that. We lack a lot of issues. We lack capacity adequate at the ground level. We have slow implementation of programs. So it all...
In your reporting on this story, did you come across the fact that, maybe not enough is being done on the ground when it comes to climate change action? Our rickshaw pullers, our shopkeepers, the word on the ground, the sentiment, it seems like they're not at all worried about climate change. They're worried about getting through the day per se. So if the message does not trickle down to the grassroots level, how do we expect action to take, change to take place in the first place?
And it's not even rickshaw pullers type of strata. We also know of lot of educated people who are still not serious about it, and they act exactly like the frog that we have shown in the story. Why? Because it's not affecting them today. Go and ask the farmer in Yavatmal who 3 days ago faced massive hailstorm and could witness his entire rabi crop being damaged. He will tell you better the impact of climate change. But unfortunately, his voice is unheard by Delhi. People sitting in Delhi, or even common citizens like you and me, we get our milk on time, we get water, we can buy water, we are not worried about Yamuna's condition. So the impact does not pinch us directly today. It has already started affecting people on ground, but unfortunately their voice is not heard.
All right, absolutely. We also have with us on the broadcast Aarti Khosla, who's the founder for Climate Trends. Aarti, how are you looking at the IPCC report? I mean, it's a clear warning. Humanity is treading on thin ice. How delicate must we approach these concerns, and what must be done? I mean, it's the same argument every time, whenever it starts raining, there are hailstorms, there are adverse climate conditions and situations. But what is really being done? Should we just stop using our ACs? Should we really stop using our cars? Has it come to that?
So as you see, the report is a very comprehensive assessment of science, but it's also a very comprehensive offering of policies. And what it says in short is that there are tried and tested policies in how you can reduce emissions while also pursuing growth and development. And mostly, like your comment before, what are the rickshaw pullers doing? I feel more than that, it's really a matter of making system change and policy change. And to enable that, it is quite important at this moment to have some policies which are integrated policies. So you address both things that you cannot change, which is you adapt to them, and you also address what you can change in the future, which means that you mitigate the emissions in future. Now, given that large parts of India also will be in a heat stress, I think what is required is to establish those technologies as mainstream technologies where the supply side changes the provision of energy systems in a way that the emissions tend to reduce over a period of time. It is impossible to imagine a city where you cannot use air conditioners or you're not allowed to use cars anymore. But I think more and more it's a matter of how do you make redistributive policies, which means that the vulnerable people who are the least responsible for it are not the ones who are the most impacted. And how is it that you bring about mitigation? There are several ways that the IPCC report suggests. For instance, 30 to 40% of gains can come just by making your appliances more energy efficient. There is huge gains that can be made by also making sure that in future, any power demand is by renewable energy alone, meaning by solar and wind, and use of battery technology, and not setting up more thermal power plants, for instance. I'll pause, but I'll come back to it in the next round.
All right, thank you so much. Anjal Prakash also with us on the broadcast. Your viewpoint on the, the aspect of food insecurity and natural calamities vis-a-vis climate change and the adverse impacts that we've already seen. I mean, I'm somebody who really likes to, take care of their summer and winter clothing and the unpacking and packing of it. It seems like I've had to unpack it again because of the weather here in the National Capital Region. But in terms of food security, it's the year of millets for India. There is already, some sort of setback that the country has seen in terms of its wheat production. But what else? What does the IPCC report specifically talk about food insecurity?
Yeah, I'll come to the food insecurity part very soon, but let me just stress 2 points which the recent report has brought in, I think, to the plate, which is very important for us to take note of. One is definitely about the climate trends which are incompatible, in a sense that these are there are no new findings, because this is synthesizing 6 reports which has come from 2014 to 2022, and in a nutshell, it is giving you a science which is out there for us to take action. So first part is that the way the global warming is happening, we are even going to breach 2-degree warming, and every fraction of warming has an impact on lives and livelihood. Let me come to the food security aspect, because this agriculture is the first and foremost sector which is going to be hugely impacted by the changes which is happening, which is already happening. Now, you talked about the changing weather and all that. In Telangana, where I'm logging in from, in Hyderabad, just 3 days before we had a hailstorm. The entire standing crops of the farmers who have toiled for 4-5 months for a crop of wheat and otherwise have totally gone, Basakir, just in 1 or 2 days. Imagine this is what is happening. I've written an op-ed about the farmers in Punjab facing problems in terms of their wheat production. Their 20 to 30% decline in the wheat production because of the early warming which has happened. And now we see that the entire production has been affected because of the rainfall, which has been so unprecedented. It has never seen before kind of condition which have. So these are things which are alarming. And there's very little individuals can do about it, because these are very global phenomena, but has a very localized impact. And that means that, as Aarti is telling us, that we need to actually look beyond this, in a sense that, one, definitely we have to have a cooperation among other countries so that we can collectively reduce climate footprints, and also work on the mitigation aspect. But at the same time, we also have to look inward, and we have to get into the planning process where all our development planning has to be compatible to the climate change which is happening. That means we have to look at it from the lens of the climate change and make changes in our policies. And that is where the problem lies. We have to get to what we call not even district, sub-district level planning, and trying to see what are the problems people are facing, how are they facing, and what can be done about it. So this is something which is, I would say, that has been really a huge problem for people, especially for the people who are in the lowest socioeconomic conditions, or people who are on the margins of the society. These are the people who have actually been impacted by the changes process, not you and I, because we can always have a resilience factor. We can always find something which can save us from the not the poor people. And in India, if we are talking about this, it is about 400 to 500 million people which are going to be impacted. So huge problem that I see, Anand, in the process, and I have really no remorse for what is going to happen next.
Right. Circling back to Aarti Khosla over there, we've got Anjal Prakash over here who's talking about the lower rung and the social economic strata of people that are less resilient. And that's not just the case with India, because the IPCC report also, interestingly puts forth the factor of how there is unfairness on the global stage as well. You've got your poor nations that often have to be, at the receiving end of such climate situations. How do we balance out the Libra scales in that situation? Take a look at what's happening in Africa, in the South American countries. A simple natural calamity is going to push the entire labor force to, migrate. How do we balance out the Libra scales over there? How do we make that particular section of the global society more resilient?
Couple of things there. If you see this IPCC report, it feels that for the first time, fairness and equity are offered as solutions. Even when the topic of finance was being discussed, the point that was made is that there is no dearth of finance. Money is available. It is just that due to lack of equity principles, money is not being put into where there is more risk and where there is more vulnerability, which means, for example, the vast continent of Africa, as you very rightly pointed out. And I think that has been the the problem of climate negotiations for as long as they have existed, that in the end, these are geopolitical conversations which tend to be about the right to develop. And when it comes to that, then equity and justice really play a center stage in how decisions must be made. Just one example, for instance, India has been a very huge proponent of what is called the lifestyle for environment, which means that every individual should also reduce their own consumption. And that has found some mention in the IPCC synthesis reports as well, which actually means that it is not just a certain section of the vulnerable population, but it is also those who are living in the so-called global north who have high levels of per capita consumption must also look at bringing that back if we are to live in a world that is equitable, as well as we are able to manage climate impacts. Because with the scale of impacts, it is quite impossible to even imagine that you will be able to deal with those impacts in an equitable manner. The best thing will be international cooperation, where countries can at least agree, and which is why you saw all the discussion on loss and damage. So loss and damage is actually what you cannot bring back. And to that extent, there are several small island states, there are vulnerable countries, there are least developed countries who have lost parts of their geographies, which they will never be able to bring back. And I think that's the level of climate justice that is required. But we are far away from that level of justice. At least the IPCC report acknowledges the increased need of financing, money being there, but barriers not really about the lack of money, but where to invest, and something also about resilient development. So you integrate, not just focus on bringing down emissions, but also focus on simple things like disaster management and evacuation. And when an extreme weather event strikes, how do you make sure that those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, those who are most susceptible to any kind of extreme weather, can at least be safely taken to a particular place when an extreme weather strikes? There has to be some early warning systems in place, and that was also one of the things that was discussed. It really feels to me that as much as the energy conversations are crucial, you have to bring energy use down in future. It's equally important to today have at least an agreement between countries on what are the top 5 or 10 things that they are doing to basically adapt to the level of climate change that we have already seen, because we are today sitting at a moment in time when the carbon dioxide concentrations have been the highest in 2 million years, and this is not normal. So if that's the scale of the problem, the scale of the solution has to also be quite significant and large.
Well, absolutely. Not just that. I mean, the highest temperatures that have been recorded in the last 50 odd years. But Nivedita, in your reportage on the ground, do you think that climate change or climate action is actually an issue on the ground. Many of these states that are running up to these crucial assembly elections as well, no state do you see it to be a crucial election issue at all. Climate change seems to be at the back burner, right on the priority level. It's right behind there. Your viewpoint on that, give us a sense of what it has been like talking to people, trying to make them aware about climate change, but at the same time telling them how important it is for them as well.
We have certain states which have acknowledged the factor that climate change is going to impact, and they have started taking measures, but they are exception to the rule. Like Sikkim went wholly organic many years ago. Then there is a state somewhere in Maharashtra, the previous government said, okay, we are going for a pro-climate policy kind of stuff. But overall, in 2008, when India had come out with National Climate Action Plan and respective states had come up with those, half of the things or more than half of the things are not seen the light of the day. Updation of those plans is going on and it's at lethargic pace. This shows that even the bureaucracy, forget the political parties which are looking at 5-year terms and election promises and all that. Even the bureaucracy is not as sensitive as it should have been. So that in a way has an impact on the ground. For instance, we are talking about heat. There has been a heat action plan in place, and 2010 it started. Ahmedabad was the first one to have things in place, and 23 cities are still working on it. It's been more than 5 years now. So if things happen at this pace, it's like a behemoth not just willing to change or not just willing to move. So we have a problem right in front of you. We are sitting at the door front, and then we will not
We're just not ready to acknowledge it per se.
As in acknowledging, they at the back of mind they know it. The government knows it, the policymakers know it, even the politicians know it. But they seem to be targeting only short-term interests.
Right.
And okay, this can be done slowly, later, those kind of stuff.
The idea, it seems like, and it is dangerous to think of it like that as well, that the government and our policymakers and the bureaucracy, they feel that they're going to burn the bridge when they come to that bridge, unless the summer, the heat wave, burn that bridge before they are able to. On the other hand, let's quickly take a look at the snippet. It's called The Big Bun. What to expect, what not to expect, where is this heat wave leading, what kind of agricultural output loss will this lead to? All of that on our docu-series called The Big Bun, only on the News 9 Plus application. Download it now. Here's a snippet. Check it out.
Human beings in the 21st century are demonstrating terrifying adaptability to unprecedented climate change. The soaring temperatures that come with climate change are becoming the new normal. The boiling frog analogy explains this phenomenon. A frog put in a pot of boiling water jumps out quickly. But if it's put in a pot of water and the heat is increased gradually, the frog will slowly cook to death. So, are you behaving like a frog in a simmering climate change pot? An intense heat wave that swept across large parts of India has broken records of past 122 years, putting a large chunk of people at the risk of heat-related health impacts.
What the extreme heat conditions and heat wave do is, of course, the direct effect on the skin and the rest of the organs. But the indirect water electrolyte mediated effects are most crucial. Physical and mental health actually gets affected seriously by the depletion of water and the electrolytes.
Now, coming to physical health, we realize that heat wave can actually lead to increased risk for cerebrovascular accidents. It can impact your lungs, it can impact your heart, especially people who have pre-existing comorbidities like they have a pulmonary disorder or those who have heart disease. They can really be impacted by the heat exhaustion that may lead to heat strokes.
It's not anything new that has happened this time. It has been happening for last 2 to 3 decades at least. Since there has been a rising temperature, every year the record is broken.
Rising temperature across India has affected wheat production of the country. Punjab is one of the leading wheat-producing states in the country. Farmers in this state have suffered huge crop losses due to the extreme heat. Currently, the world is about 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the 19th century, which indicates that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen by 50%. Experts claim that there is a 50-50 chance of the average global temperature rising to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 5 years. And the chances of that happening are constantly increasing with time. A study conducted by 29 researchers and climate scientists warns that with rising temperature of the globe, heat waves will be more common and hotter in coming times. As per the report, heat waves are likely to happen 30 times more in the Indian subcontinent. And if the situation is left unchecked, then we may soon witness worsening droughts, rising sea levels, and mass extinction of species.
Well, so you're looking at those images, and the question that props up, and generally it does, is that how do we hold these climate action enablers accountable? Interestingly, this time around in the IPCC report, these particular enablers have also been mentioned. Anjal Prakash, give us a sense of how you're looking into this. There is, of course, we need competitive governance, we need international cooperation. All these enablers are there, but how do we hold them accountable?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because the question of accountability, and I'll take off from where Aarti left in terms of looking at the climate justice framework. I think the framework gives us a broad understanding of how and who should be held accountable. See, today's climate change problem in this part of the world where we are speaking to you from is not our creation, right? So this is the creation of the industrialized North, which has polluted the planet, and now asking all of us to go to net zero by a particular date without being accountable to what they have done and how they should pay. In fact, the COP27, the major point of discussion was that the loss and damage fund has to be created. At least we have fought for it, and we actually have some headways in terms of who should be able to pay and how much is it, right? So those nuances are going to be there. So, so this is one question of larger question of what we call the climate justice, and then people, especially those who have polluted the planet. But the second problem, which is I think much more nuanced, and I'd like to focus on here. The earlier model was that, you develop, you pollute, and then you try and fix the environment. This is what the West has done for all these years. Now, what we see that then recent climate change report, the IPCC report has very unequivocally told us that now that model is not available. That means we have already breached many boundaries, the planetary boundaries of the planet, and that means that we cannot afford to pollute. The more we pollute, the more the problem will come to us. That means we must take the green growth path. And that means that we really have to transform ourselves in terms of economy, in terms of the way we are developing, and the green growth principles that we must adopt to. And this is where I think most of the developing countries also have to adapt to. We don't have any option but to go a green way, and that's where I think the nuances of this can be worked out. And I also want to take this opportunity to say that the Indian government has done a lot, especially in the energy, renewable energy sectors, in a lot of other sectors. We have done a lot, but a long way to go to close the loop, and that's where we are standing here. But
the G20 presidency is also something that people are, really looking up to. The climate consensus that the G20 presidency is talking about. But if anything, if the IPCC report is anything to go by, it's high time the bureaucracy, the policymakers, and the people also pull up their socks, because, like the report quotes, we are treading on very thin ice. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast, Aarti Khosla and Anjal Prakash. for your insightful inputs. Nivedita, my colleague, thank you so much for your reportage. We're going to slip into a quick break here. Content continues on the other side. Don't go anywhere.